Welcome everybody, and thank you for coming this afternoon to the fourth webinar session of our Passive House for Education building series. My name is Sarah Lewis. For those of you who joined us for session 2 a couple of weeks ago, you will already have met me. I work for Hampson Barron Smith as an Associate Director, Architect and Passive House Consultant, and I'm going to be chairing today's session. So our session today is focusing on setting a Passive House budget. The previous sessions have covered everything from Passive House as a route to zero carbon to developing a brief and sort of procurement options for both retrofit and new build Passive House schools. Before I introduce our speakers today, I'll just give a brief summary of my background. So as well as working for Hampson Barron Smith, I'm author of PHPP Illustrated, a manual for designers using the Passive House software, which was first published in 2013. And for that, I collaborated with the International Passive House Institute in Germany. And I recently joined the team at Warm and Carbon Light, delivering Passive House training around the UK. At Hampson Barron Smith, we are currently developing a number of large-scale Passive House projects alongside working through the design stages of what's likely to be one of the UK's first Passive House Enefit or retrofit school buildings. And while this may be one of the first Enefit school buildings, there is actually a long lineage in the UK of new build Passive House school buildings. And we are very fortunate today to have with us Archetype, who delivered the UK's first Passive House schools way back in 2013, I think it was. Jonathan can correct me if that's not quite right, and are now working on Passive House schools right around the UK. Hopefully I'm sure they will be sharing their experience of budgeting for Passive House schools, adapting to various different funding models and requirements over the years, including their current portfolio of projects in Scotland, where they're working with Faithful and Gold, who will be joining us as well today to share their experience of delivering Passive House projects. So now, before I run through the housekeeping for today's session, just as a little bit of fun interaction to make sure that everybody is awake, we're going to run a poll. So that should be popping up on your screens if all goes to plan now. The question is, what do you think has the biggest potential impact on costs in a Passive House project? And this is a multiple choice, so please select as many responses as you would like. Now, while you're making your deliberations, I will quickly run through the housekeeping. So I think most people are probably quite familiar with these webinar sessions now. So there's a Q&A box and there's a chat window. So you should be able to see those by looking at the controls at the bottom of your screen. And if you want to post questions to the speakers, use the Q&A box, and you can do that anytime during the event. We'll have 5 minutes for questions after each speaker's presentation today, so we'll run through some questions there, and any we don't quite manage to get to, we can hold for the panel session at the end of today's event, which we've got 15 minutes, which should be plenty of time to work through any other questions which have come up. If you've just got sort of general discussion, if you just want to say hi to people, or if you've got any administration issues, please pop those in the comments box in the chat window. So hopefully that's clear. I think, well, I can see some people are still making some. No, I think we're pretty much there on the poll. So I think we can see that. I'm just going to scroll down so I can see the whole poll. So initial design decisions and air tightness currently are polling highest, but services and materials are coming in as the next most significant item. So it'll be very interesting to see how that ties through with what we learn from Jonathan and Stuart today. So we'll just close that poll now. The webinar today is being recorded, and we will be making that available to all attendees after the event. It will take a day or two usually for us to get that up and live, so do keep an eye out for an email probably towards the end of the week updating you with that. And importantly, a huge thank you to the sponsors for the webinar series, which is made up of 6 sessions. Today is session 4, and those sponsors are Robertson, Hub, East Central and Archetype. And how can I close that? So today's webinar, as I said, is one of 6. It's part of phase 2. So as mentioned at the start, it's the 4th in this Passive House for Educational Building series, with 2 sessions still to come. And it builds upon the very successful and well-attended phase 1 of the series, the Passive House Trust Educational Buildings campaign, which was run in the autumn last year, with phase 3 to follow, which is focusing on research and guidance around costs and benefits associated with Passive House school projects. So watch for notifications on that. So if you've not done so already, please do book onto the final 2 sessions, which are both later in June. We've got on the 9th of June, appointing and managing designers and contractors, and on the 16th of June, early stage design decisions, which was one of those ones that popped up on the poll. So we can see how important and critical that is in terms of managing costs on a project. And booking is open for these, so please do share with your networks. And as with the other sessions, these are free to attend for a local authority and staff of educational institutes. And just to highlight that this final session on the 23rd of June is a workshop and it needs to be booked separately. The Eventbrite online booking link can be found on the Trust's event page on their website, and the numbers for this session will be really limited to facilitate kind of a really lively discussion, hopefully, and lots of engagement with the participants. It's an excellent opportunity to put your detailed and challenging questions to a really expert panel, and this session won't be shared, so the format will support discussion of sensitive topics in a very secure environment, and it is exclusive to local authorities and school building clients. So if that is you, I cannot recommend this session highly enough. Spaces are limited. So now on to what you are all here for today, today's expert speakers. We will be starting with Stuart McLean from Faithful and Gold, who will be speaking to us today about their experience of setting a passive house budget. Stuart is a director responsible for Faithful and Gold's business in central Scotland. He leads a team of over 80 talented and enthusiastic professionals who are delivering capital and asset management projects for a range of public and private sector clients. He has a focus on delivering best value, and the Faithful and Gold team are working with leading consultants in Scotland to optimise their performance of their clients' estates. Stuart is directly involved in the delivery of Passive House, a project which he's working on with Archetypes. So that's the Passive House designed Curry Community High School and the Maybury Passive House has a Passive House Primary School for City of Edinburgh Council, and his wider team are delivering Passive House projects right across Scotland. Stuart sits on the Construction Industry Leadership Group in Scotland and is a fellow of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. So we are very fortunate to have him with us today. And our second speaker is Jonathan Hines, who will be sharing with us Archetypes' approach to achieving a Passive House budget. Jonathan is Managing Director of Archetype and a member of the board of the Passivhaus House Trust. I think people have gone to other presentations about school projects. They may have come across Jonathan and Archetypes' work already. He's very passionate about eliminating the performance gap in buildings and has led Archetypes' position at the forefront of building performance evaluation and monitoring in the UK and its pioneering Passive House projects. Jonathan oversaw the delivery of the first Passive House primary schools in the UK from right back in 2010, and since then the delivery of the first Passive House secondary school and the first Passive House Plus school, along with many other building types, including archive buildings, residential and offices. And more recently, Jonathan has been instrumental in promoting the adoption of the Passive House standard in Scotland, driven by the new Scottish Futures Trust energy metric, and has led the rapid development of Archetypes' Edinburgh office. Archetype now employs 70 staff based in Edinburgh, London, Hertfordshire, and 80% of Archetypes projects are now Passive House projects. So I will not speak to you anymore. I know that you're all here to hear from our expert speakers, so I will now hand over to Stuart for his presentation on setting a Passive House budget.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll just share my screen. Brilliant. Okay, right, thanks. Second try at this. So thanks for having me along, and thanks for the introduction. In terms of what I'm going to go through today, I'm going to talk a wee bit about who we are, and I'll come on to that shortly, but that's just to set a bit of a scene why we're talking, or why I've been asked along to talk today. I'm also going to talk about getting more for your money, and I think that is something that Passive House should be considered for from a cost perspective. It does deliver more for the money that's spent on a project. I'm going to talk about setting a budget, what the work and the focus that needs to be done to set that budget in the outset, and then delivering to that budget, managing the costs. And if time allows for me, then I've got a couple of practical examples just to put into practice some of the things I'll talk about. So in terms of who we are, my team in Faithful and Gold in Scotland, in central Scotland, it is a team that are working on Passive House projects now, and we've come a long way in a very short period of time. So I'm not sitting here today talking to you all saying I am the resident expert in Faithful and Gould. We've a really enthusiastic and vibrant team who are thoroughly engaged with Passive House and everything that we can see that it's delivering for our projects, for our clients, and the learning, the knowledge share, the information that we're collaborating with Archetype and with Jonathan's team is tremendous, and we're coming a long way in a very short period of time, which feels like the whole Passive House journey, certainly in Scotland. We have come a long way, as I say, and if we'd spoken 2 years ago, we weren't delivering any live Passive House projects at that moment in time. And you can see just a selection of some of the projects that the team are involved in, some of which I'm overseeing, others, the likes of Curry High School, I'm actively involved in working alongside Jonathan and Anne-Marie. We were also involved, Sarah mentioned the Scottish Futures Trust Learning Estate programme. One of our team, Owen, who you would have seen on the previous slide, was involved with Scottish Futures Trust, setting the cost benchmark for the programme, which it doesn't have to be Passive House to deliver under that programme, but Passive House is the most effective way for achieving the metrics that are required for the funding. So Owen was massively involved in reviewing Passive House projects across the UK and establishing how to set up that budget. Okay, so that's who we are in Faithful and Gould. I'm going to talk now about Passive House, and I'm acutely aware that I'm coming at this from a quantity surveyor, cost manager, bit of a project manager perspective. So the likes of Sarah and Jonathan know way more about Passive House than I, but I think, you know, one of the things from a cost perspective we need to be acutely aware of is, despite the fact that Passive House standard has been around for a long time now, and it's over 30 years, the outturn cost for low energy buildings is a relatively new topic. And quantity surveyors, cost managers as a profession, we like to work top down. So we like something to benchmark against, whether that's a square metre rate, a cost per pupil, a cost per desk, whatever that is. We like a benchmark that tells us this is what's been delivered previously, therefore our costs are within the same ballpark, and we feel comfortable that it can be delivered from there. Without that data, if we just take a traditional project approach, benchmark it from the top down, and then do what we've often done in the past and add on an uplift for Passive House, then that's not going to deliver best value for the project. That's not going to deliver the best outturn cost. And I'm not going to say it's a lazy way of doing it, but it's a very easy way of delivering an estimate of cost. So one of the things that we've been driving really hard, and we've been working with Barry Young, with Ian McLean and Owen and our cost management team, is getting bottom-up analysis from the word go. So trying to build a picture of the project right at the outset, and trying to work with teams like Archetype and the M&E engineers to establish what's the extra over aspects that we need to be including for in this particular project. So it makes it more project specific as we go. I'm sure you've all seen a version of this picture before, and it's one of the first pictures I saw with regards to a Passive House project. And, you know, from a cost perspective, this speaks volumes. The reduction from a big boiler setup like you would get in a normal school down to a domestic boiler is, you know, cost-wise, it's easy to say that that's going to be a significant saving. It reduces space as well. And this is the sort of thing that we do need to focus on as a project. We can get focused on the additional cost items, which I'll talk about shortly, and we can lose sight of some of the simplicity that gets introduced through Passive House, some of the benefits that we achieve through Passive House. So I've shown this here as a focus that we need to keep in our minds of those benefits that we can get. I'm sure you've all seen this diagram many times before, and from a cost side of things, it's an interesting way to start to look at it. We need to start by looking at each of the quadrants and trying to decide where is the cost or benefit and the cost negative that we're going to establish by looking at a Passive House project. So if we take form and orientation, and if we go back to the poll where early design decisions, I think that's a fascinating outcome of that poll, because getting the right form in a simplistic manner and the right orientation in a simplistic manner, that needn't cost any more money. And actually what we've seen on some of the projects that we're working on it's a reduced cost compared to a traditional build, because in a traditional build, nobody's really focusing on the efficiency of the orientation, the efficiency of the form. They're just looking at the shape and the aesthetics of it. So we're seeing benefit there. When we move round the circles, the facade design and the fabric construction, there's no two ways about it. Those are likely to cost overall more than what a traditional project will cost. Whether that be additional slab insulation, roof insulation, triple glazing, whatever that is, both of those aspects are likely to cost more. And what we need to do as a profession, as cost managers, is help make sure that those increases are reduced as much as possible. And then lastly, the MEP services. Yes, the boiler and the heating plant is going to be smaller in a passive house project, which is a massive plus, but there are some other items such as ventilation, which we're finding are getting brought in, and we're working hard now to offset those balances to make sure it's as close to cost neutral as we can possibly make it. So we can't get away from the fact that passive house does deliver more for your money, but it is slightly more expensive when you look around that circle to get there. And part of the job is making sure that we consider that when we're setting the budget, and that we work through the management of the project to make sure the costs are as low as possible. So I'm going to talk now about setting the budget. And it was interesting having some of the thought processes as I was pulling together these slides, and some of the ideas that came to mind, and it brought a different way to express it for me. So as we worked through, I started to look at some of the projects that we've been delivering, whether they be passive house, whether they be traditional projects, and started to break down the costs. And you can see there that the vast majority of the cost sits in the construction. The next biggest spend is 11% with the professional fees, and thereafter the development costs, which might be land purchase or legal costs or whatever that is, and then a client's internal costs, their own project managers and their own teams. They're relatively small in comparison. So the bulk of the spend on any project sits in the construction and professional fees. And interestingly, those are the two areas that are impacted most by a passive house design and the passive house requirements that are going to happen in the construction phase. So that's where our focus is. We then need to determine, when we're setting out at the start of the project, is where we want the money to be spent. And this is quite a busy slide, so apologies for that. There's a lot of ideas went down at the one time, but it really starts with the business case. And a lot of the times we'll all have been involved in projects where the business case won't be as robust and as well thought out as it potentially could have been. Now, when I started in the industry, which is a while ago now, we only spoke about time, cost, and quality as the project drivers. And we were told right from day one that we were seeking a balance between time, cost, and quality on that project. And if we focused on one, for example, time, if that became the critical driver, then we might find that quality was reduced, that costs went up, because all the focus was going towards time. So that was what we looked at as an industry 20 plus years ago. Now, the industry has become more complex, like much of the world, and we still have on the right-hand side our critical success factors with quality, with programme, and with capital cost. But we're starting to bring in others, and you've got life cycle cost, and more life cycle cost is becoming a massive consideration in setting a budget, and that's the right answer for a project. We've also got environmental performance and then asset performance, and these are starting to be weighed equally with quality, programme, capital cost, because they are as important for many facilities as any of the others. So we then need to think about what is that priority. And at the end of the day, clients, whether they're building a school, whatever they're building, they tend to have a finite pot that they've got to fit their facility within, whether that comes through their own funding or whether that comes through funding mechanisms. They can't go over that finite pot. And you can't fit everything in. And those are just some of my ideas. I'm sure there are a whole host of other project priorities I could have on the screen right now. But if we're focusing on passive house, then that might be drawing some of the money that we would take away from aesthetics. And Jonathan, I'll point out later on when he's doing his talk that aesthetics needn't give way to passive house. A passive house building can still be aesthetically beautiful, and he's correct with that. But we might need to compromise therefore on floor area, or we might need to compromise on risk transfer. one of the things that we're just going to have to do as we work through setting that budget and then managing through that budget is deciding where are the project priorities, where do we want to spend our money, and what's given the best result, lining back to the client's aspirations and the success factors. This is just the outcome of a project that we've recently gone through, where we did a government 5-step business case, and they've identified 5 key spending objectives for the project. And you can see there, future workspaces, net zero, accessibility and inclusion, security and business continuity, and then digital. Those are the 5 spending objectives for this project. And when they're going through their full business case, and then when they're going into the construction or the real design phase after that, and then the construction phase, as they're making their decisions, they'll come back to these 5 project spending objectives. And in a passive house school or any other facility, achieving passive house accreditation would be sitting there as one of those objectives, and we would continually need to come back to see, are we spending money in the right way and are we getting value? So in terms of setting the budget, we can imagine that's all been set now. We've focused in the right areas. We know what budget we want. We then go into a phase of managing the costs, and right at the outset, normally the next phase is getting a design team involved. And those early design decisions as part of the poll, that's a critical factor in having the right team there. So for clients who are sometimes new to passive house as much as anything else, there's some key things that they have to get right. Firstly, we've got to understand the roles, and this is something that I've learned over the past 2 years, particularly working with Archetype, but working with others as well, is that there are additional roles to deliver a passive house project. And a passive house designer is not just the same as an architect, and we can't just assume that our normal architects or engineers or whoever can deliver that service without getting additional time to spend on the money to run additional models, to do everything that's involved in delivering a passive house project. So we need to understand the roles. We need to make sure within the team construct that there's a role for that passive house designer. And then we need to make sure that they have the right experience. It's critically important that we're not practicing on projects as we develop, that people aren't learning as they go, because decisions that are made early doors, as you all know, will have a massive impact on the deliverability of the project. And if we have to de-engineer those decisions or work around them, they'll have a massive impact on the cost. So it's important we secure the right experience. It's important that we drive the team to give us value at every turn. So that's about making design efficiency decisions as we go through. We shouldn't just be coming back at the end of each stage, as we've often seen on projects where it comes back over budget and we have to value engineer and we take a lot of the good stuff out because we're just cutting costs at that stage. We need to have a team that work together to work through value as they're going through the design process, and they're updating the costs as they go. And that's where I've said we need to assess the cost regularly. I think as a profession, quantity surveyors have fallen into the habit now of only providing an update on a project cost at the end of each REBA stage. And in some of our major projects, a REBA stage can last 6, 9+ months. And that means that there's 9 months without a cost update, even if it's not a full cost plan. There's 9 months without a cost update where design's been developed and decisions can be getting made that then need to be de-engineered if the project ends up being over budget at the end of the stage. So I think there's an opportunity to assess costs as we go through and have mid-stage updates, however we want to call them, to see where the costs are. So success for a project there is going to deliver an experienced team. It's going to have proactive cost management and not reactive. We're going to have a value for money focus. And the one thing I've not mentioned is we're going to have a life cycle cost analysis, and I'm going to come on to that shortly. With that gets our team set up, and then we need to go into delivering those costs and building up the design at this point to give us a construction cost that's going to be within that budget. And for me, I'm going to go right back to what I said in one of the earlier slides. It's not top down, it's bottom up analysis. And as soon as possible, we need to start to build a cost picture that's really representative of the project that's been developed, so that we're taking on board the efficiencies that we're seeing in the orientation and in the form of the building, and we're starting to factor in some of the additional cost items to achieve the Passive House accreditation, so that it is a real picture of what this project's costing. particularly on a programme like the Learning Estates programme in Scotland, where it's funded against a funding mechanism and metrics. We need to make sure that we're delivering the project against those metrics. So that has to come hand in hand with the costing, and we have to make sure that we're always tying back to what that metric is, that we're managing within it, and that we're finding ways to drive enough room under the metric to give us some comfort as we go through the design phases. There's no reason to design up to the metric at every point. There will be problems on any construction project, so we need to manage within there. Going round about the wheel, I've already mentioned design efficiency. I'm going to come back to contractor engagement. Whole life cost analysis, it's really important that that starts right at the outset. And I've got a slide just after, but it's essential that in stage one, almost of the design process, we build up a whole life cost model and we keep that updated alongside the capital cost modeling. And then finally, I've got financial modeling and cash flow. And that's something that we should be doing at the outset, particularly given the types of materials that we're going to be purchasing for a passive house project. They do cost a wee bit more, and with the current issues with material supply in the UK, it's really important just now that we see where that cash flow sits. I said I was going to come back to contractor engagement, and I think this is one of the most critical parts of the process. I think getting the right design team on board and managing that design team and focusing them in terms of priorities towards passive house and making sure that we're not making decisions to the detriment of the project are key. I think the fourth aspect to that is the contractor engagement. Traditionally, what we've done is we've put projects out to tender, and we've done that on a one tender event, which will give us the cheapest price normally wins scenario, and that's a way that the industry's traditionally looked at getting best value. However, what that does is it gives a contracting organisation somewhere 5, 6, maybe 8 weeks to tender a major project. And they have to get to grips with the information that comes out to them. They have to disseminate that to their supply chain. They have to get the supply chain up to speed, and then they need to pull it back in and put in a competitive price. And the reality is, passive house is new to much of those contractors and much of the supply chain, and that's not going to be long enough for them to get themselves fully up to speed. So what we'll either see is underpriced projects where we're going to have problems later on and they're going to be trying to recover costs. They'll either cut corners in terms of quality, or it'll become a claims conscious project, or we see a situation where they put too much risk allowance into the cost because they're uncertain, and that's just going to push that cost up. So what we're establishing, and I'm convinced about this, what we're seeing is that two-stage process is the best way of engaging with the market right now. It can often be viewed as not delivering the cheapest price, but I think when you weigh up the pros and cons of bringing along the supply chain, upskilling the contractors and making sure that they're bought into the process of the design and what they have to do post-contract, and also giving them the chance to advise on buildability, I think the benefits far outweigh any downside, and it's up to the cost consultant, the quantity surveyor at that point, to make sure that they're integrating the contractor's second stage. So success for the project in this phase for me is it's informed decision making, making sure that we've got costs available to support each decision so that we're taking the right decision at the right time. It's accurate cost modelling, and that's all the way through with regular updates. It gives clients the opportunity to do real-time optioneering, and then we've got our value for money focus, and we've got our life cycle cost. And just jumping onto life cycle, if there's ever an advert from a cost perspective to do passive house, it is the life cycle cost of that project. We've looked at a number of projects over the past while, and one of them, just down in the bottom left, we ran a traditional cost model over 50 years and a comparative cost model, passive house cost model over the same 50-year period, and it was 55 million for the traditional and 50 for the passive house project, which is to justify me being a QS, which is 10% less. And you know, that's the advert for why we would deliver a passive house project. If we could say the capital cost would be 10% less, then nobody would ever bat an eyelid. What we need to start doing as an industry is looking at the life cycle cost of a project. So in terms of what I'm going to talk about today, that's the sum total. I do have a couple of practical considerations just to demonstrate where we are. And this is a nice one, going back to the poll again. This is a project that we've worked on with Jonathan and his team, and they did some optioneering around about the orientation of the building based upon the site that had already been selected. And working through these options, they came up with the best solution, the one that was going to give us the optimum way to get to Passive House accreditation, which was fantastic. And it was a seamless process. And from my involvement, I barely even noticed it was happening. Conversely, we are involved in a project which had gone to almost stage 2 when the client decided that they wanted to take the project down a Passive House route. The site had already been selected, the building had already been oriented, all the decisions, those early decisions had been made, and we were left with the option of redesigning and going back a stage and a half almost to take it to that point where we would look at the design all over again, or trying to find ways to cost and engineer round about the decisions that had already been made. And that's when it became apparent the ease of decision making if you get it right first time, early doors, and the fact that it has no cost impact, and in fact it saves costs if you do it that way. Secondly, and just round about that early contractor engagement, one of the things we really need to think about is the supply chain. If we're putting out details, we're putting out construction methodology, and we're putting out different ways of working to the supply chain. If they either don't understand it and they don't have the time to understand it, or they don't have the time to cost it, then we're not going to get an accurate reflection. And that's either going to affect the outturn cost of the project, or it's going to affect the quality that we're going to see on site, which will end up costing more anyway, regardless. So I really do think that one of the things that we can do is start to think about early contractor engagement, engaging right the way through their supply chain, getting to the subcontractors and making sure they fully understand what needs to be delivered on their end in order for us to achieve our projects. And that will, despite the time that it takes to do that, that will be a benefit to cost overall. So Sarah, that's it from me. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much for that presentation, Stuart. I think everyone will have enjoyed that and found it as informative as I did. And we've actually had loads of questions coming in. Now we're going to just do a 5-minute question Q&A at this point, and we'll save any questions we don't get to. We'll save any questions we don't get to the panel at the end, where we're going to have a full 15 minutes. So maybe we'll get through maybe just a couple now. So the first question which came in was, what typical percentage reduction are you finding in the MEP plant space and size in terms of kilowatts required compared to a non-passive house? And is the MEP consultant happy to reduce the size that they would normally use for kind of a peak or worst case condition? You're on mute at the moment, Stuart.
Thank you. Okay, that is a technical question that I am afraid I don't know the answer to. What I do know from our MEP consultants is that they are reducing their plant space. They are reducing the size of the plant that they're providing on our projects, and we're starting to see that filter in. And I know that firsthand right now, because we're going through a cost update on a project, and we're producing quite a detailed cost plan where we're looking at the cost of the services, and they're coming in at a point where the designers are saying to us, we are delivering what we'd allowed for in the earlier stages. I'm afraid I don't know the technical answer to the percentage.
We can probably take that question over to Jonathan as well in the second half of the presentation. Okay, so another one which came in today while you were giving your presentation. Where would you say the major time considerations are in terms of project program in comparison to a non-passive house school project?
Yeah, I think the time considerations are in the front end of the design phase, and what we've done, what we've worked really hard on all our projects to do is to make sure that we're not cutting corners in that design. And we've seen on projects, I'm sure many people have, where we've been slow in getting through the design phase, or we have had some issues with decisions coming back from the client, and that's eaten into the project program at this stage, particularly stages 2, 3, and 4. We've worked really hard to protect those stages, and at every delay we've pushed them out as much as possible. And I'm not even sure we've done that enough to give us enough time to make sure that we're getting the design as robust as possible before we go to contract with the contractor. again, it's going to be the same for the construction phase. We have to make sure that we're maintaining the program. And as project managers, we often start off with a program that's comfortable with a bit of float in it, and we eat up all the float early doors, but we never replace it in any way. And it's essential that we maintain that for as long as possible, because the contractors are going to have issues when they go to site as they get used to this in the industry.
Yeah, thank you for that. Do you feel that the perception of risks by the contractors who are maybe unfamiliar with Passive House has become a bit of an issue? And what do you see as the best way to overcome that?
Yeah, I don't, from the conversations I'm having, I don't see it as an issue. I think they're quite right to have concern about the risk, because it's not we would like it to be close to Passive House or not. You know, it either achieves a Passive House standard or it doesn't. So I think it's something that it's important that the contractors be aware of. I think they need to be sensible in the management of it, and that may perhaps goes back to the building up that risk profile from the bottom, rather than just allowing a big percentage on top of the project. I think the way around about it is going to be time. And I think we're going to have to take the industry through a learning curve. And I think it's going to be persistence, and we're going to have to work hard at delivering our end from the industry side. So that whether that's a consultants like myself who are newer to delivering Passive House, whether that's contractors who are newer to delivering Passive House projects, we're going to have to really front up and do what we're signed up to do in our contracts, and we can't cut corners.
Yeah, and obviously there's quite a lot of training available now as well for contracting teams and consultant teams. So there's a lot of resources out there that people can refer to help to de-risk their projects, sort of by upskilling at the sort of front end of the projects. We'll just end with one final question, and then we'll move on to Jonathan's presentation. So this question's come in. So bottom-up estimating has been mentioned. Is this usually based on an elemental cost plan or some other method?
Yeah, it is usually based on an elemental cost plan, and if it's normally what I'm talking about is trying to get to that elemental cost plan as quickly as possible, and it is really easy. I'm a lazy quantity surveyor, like a lot of lazy quantity surveyors, and it's really easy to use square meter rates as long as possible, or rates per pupil, or whatever that is. It's about starting to look at the elements as quickly as you can. So starting to put costs against each of those elements, and some of them will be allowances to begin with, but once you've broken down into that elemental cost plan type, you've always got to come back to it, and you put more detail in at every turn of the crank. So yeah, it is about getting to an elemental cost as quickly as possible.
Great, thank you so much, Stuart. And we'll look forward to welcoming you back for the panel at the end of this session. So now I'm going to hand over to Jonathan Hines from Archetype for his presentation.
Hi, thanks, Sarah. Okay, so I'll lead on from Stuart setting out the budget to talk about how to go about achieving it. But just by way of introduction to Archetype, this is just a list of our current ongoing Passive House projects around the UK, education, housing, archive, and other project types. And just a very quick reminder about what Passive House is. It's three things really. It's a comfort standard. It's all about creating really optimized, even temperature and fresh air within the building. It's about really rigorous limits to energy in terms of thermal and overall primary energy. And really importantly, is rigorous quality assurance and certification standard with a third-party independent check that the design and the construction meets the standard. And as a result of that, Passive House is really guaranteeing that buildings perform as designed. It's reducing energy by design, not just offsetting carbon by add-ons. And in terms of cost, it's minimizing maintenance and running costs in the longer term with simpler system of controls. And as a result of all that, it's a more robust way to meet carbon targets. But there are some challenges. There's still quite a lot of myths and misconceptions out there, and that's really what this series of seminars is partly to do, to sort of spread knowledge. There's still a challenge in upskilling design teams and contractors. And the subject today really is the whole issue about can it be delivered at affordable cost. Stuart has set out some very clear grounding for making sure that we can do that. But what I'm going to focus on now is a little bit more about the how in terms of design team we respond to that. So as Stuart said, there are some potential extra costs, no doubt about it. You do have more insulation, but often not as much extra as people imagine. You do have higher performance windows, triple glazed with thermal broken frames. You have got to achieve higher standards, particularly of air tightness, and you do need a mechanical ventilation recovery, which in some cases is an extra, in some cases you'd need it anyway. But so there are extra costs. There are, as Stuart has said, some reduced costs, smaller heating systems and some of our controls, a rationalised building form that will always save money, and a reduced reliance on renewables to meet carbon targets, which are always going to be an expensive extra to the project. And there are some nil costs. If we as architects design a thermal bridge-free detail and less complex details, that shouldn't cost any more. In fact, it may also save money. And I think one of the great things about Passive House is it encourages better collaboration across the whole team. So I'm going to introduce you to the Jono, that's me, that's my nickname, rule of cost estimating. I'm always hesitant as an architect to promote my own rule of cost estimating, particularly when I'm sharing a platform with QS. But my rule goes like this: if you think a project is going to cost 15% more, 10% more, whatever it is, because it's Passive House, and you think that at the outset, and everybody thinks that and assumes at the outset, then at the end of the day, it will cost that extra. It might well be that that money isn't spent on Passive House measures, but as soon as people have got an idea about the budget is this plus 15%, there's a natural tendency to spend it, and it might well get spent on more expensive cladding or a fancier detail or a more expensive internal fitting. But the whole point of my rule is that if you simply have to see price as a matter of priority and balance everything against that budget, that price, and then Passive House needn't cost significantly or any more. It just becomes balancing, again, as Stuart has said, one priority against others. And that really is always what good design is about, is it's actually balancing all the different priorities to produce the best, most optimum solution. Now, the challenge to that is that architects generally like design complexity. And if they can make design more complicated, they usually will. And that will always cost more money to build and to maintain. Second challenge is that M&E engineers are also quite complex. They love their pipes and wires and complicated systems. But to be fair to them, they're often needing to come up with complicated solutions to solve problems in the design that the architect's built in, which perhaps shouldn't be there. And the third challenge is that contractors often price the perceived risk of the unknown and things they haven't done before. So those three challenges are the things that we really need to tackle if we're going to deliver Passive House within budget cost metrics. So how do we go about that? Well, Stuart showed this diagram, and really when we developed that, it was to demonstrate how we have rethought the design process. Typically, the design process is very linear. The architect designs the building, details it, passes it down the line to the engineers to fix it and make it work, and then down the line to the builder to build it. And at each stage, one person is just solving the problems left there by the previous. Whereas with an iterative rather than linear process, the whole team is working together, going around this circle many times to optimize the solution. So if we improve the form and orientation, we can optimize the facade design, reduce the need for complicated fabric, reduce the need for extensive services, and that in turn means we can maybe adjust the form and orientation. We go around this several times. And all along the way, we're testing, checking cost, testing, checking cost, testing, checking cost, ironing out the things that are going to cost more, looking for the most optimum solutions, look at what we can take out of design to make it work better, rather than what we have to put into it to fix a problem. So the things that we're looking at are really, first of all, responding to orientation, optimizing the building in relation to solar gain and shading, because if you don't do that, you need to spend a load of extra on shading and other devices later. Then we're looking to optimize the form itself, minimizing the ratio between the external surface area and the useful internal floor area. And this is really significant. Buildings can vary massively from ones at the top here where you've got 4 times the external fabric internal useful area down to buildings that are sort of 2 or less. And if you think about it, if you take a building with a ratio of 2 to 1 of 4, that means you've got twice the area to lose heat through. That means you need twice the thickness of insulation. So you're paying for twice as much insulation over twice the area of surface area of the building. That's a quadruple cost whammy of 4 times extra cost. So optimize the form and you will always reduce the cost. And actually, I always say one of the most obvious ways you can reduce embodied carbon in a building is just to build less building, less fabric, more optimized ratio. It's a win-win. And that doesn't mean the building has to be boring. This was one of our first passive house schools. We made it more compact, 2-story, looked very simple section, but it doesn't mean the building ends up being boring. You can still have a building with a sensible form and interesting spaces internally. Next, we're working really hard to rationalize the glazing, look at how much you need for daylighting, how much you need for ventilation, how it needs to be shaded. And this means, for example, moving away from glazing that goes right down to the floor, which architects love, which costs money, causes overheating and does nothing for daylighting, and just looking at what's the right amount of glazing for daylight and for ventilation. Then we're focused on every single detail, simplify it. If you simplify it, you design out the thermal bridging, you can make it possible for the builders to make it airtight without using huge amounts of money on foam and tapes. Simplify reduces cost. And then, sure, you can simplify the service and controls. A primary school, Passivhaus primary school, only needs one small domestic sized boiler and a single radiator in each classroom. And at a larger scale, Stuart showed this drawing, photographs showing the difference in scale of heating from a traditional building to a passive house building. And then we can look at simplifying other things, simplified switching. Once you've simplified the services, you can have less complex BMS, and with less complex renewables, you can actually make the whole thing easier, more cost effective to build, and easier and cheaper to maintain over time. And so we've found over the years that we've managed to deliver many school projects within standard budget. So our very first passive house schools in Wolverhampton over 10 years ago were built within the standard budget that was available at the time. The council came back to us 2 years later saying, well, our budget's been reduced, but we want another passive house school, can you do that? And because we'd learned and optimized lessons from monitoring the first schools, we're saving money by taking out some of the complexities of controls and simplifying glazing, and deliver the next generation of schools within the budget that they then had. But as you can see, with no compromise to the architectural quality or the educational spaces that are created within that. And then we've since delivered a number of passive house schools within the Welsh Government cost metrics, what we call our third generation passive house schools. And then more recently, we delivered the UK's first passive house secondary school within the costs that were allowed by the council there. And our experience time and time again is that if you follow this focus on simplicity of form and careful detailing and collaborative process, then you can actually offset the things that do cost more with the savings on the things where you can actually save money by simplifying form and detailing. And again, not compromise the quality of the architectural space that the clients expect from their building. And just by way of as a comparison, we did a study for Harvey Central in Scotland, where we took 2 recently completed ordinary traditional primary schools, and this is one of them, and we analysed it using the passive house software, PHP, to look at how it compares to passive house. And you can see here that whereas in a passive house building, you're looking at a heating demand of 15 kilowatt hours, this comes in at 81 kilowatt hours. And the overall delivered energy at sort of 150 kilowatt hours, way over the Scottish Government energy metrics now. Now, when you actually analyse this building, and then we look at all the measures that we would need to do to that building to make it work passive house, there's a whole series of things. You need to improve the form factor, the orientation, the window spec, the window design, improve the U values, get rid of thermal bridging, improve air tightness and MVHR. So if you took that building as designed and did all those things to it, it would cost a fortune. But every single one of those things are things which, if you start from the beginning, you can design in and make work. So this is just comparing, this is the Scottish Futures Trust energy, cost metric. This is that primary school, and sure enough, it comes in below that metric. But our passive house school that we designed for the same client also comes in under that metric, about 10% under the cost metric. Yes, it's 3.5% more than that school that we designed, but still, because of the careful design, coming in under the cost metric. And we're finding this with all our schools in Scotland. We're managing to deliver them within the metrics set by the Scottish Futures Trust. And just to give you an idea about this particular school, it's a replacement school on an existing site. We worked very hard to look at the sort of overall form factor and meet all the requirements of a large primary school with a specialist unit and a nursery, and managed to design it to a form factor of 2.25, which is sort of below our target of 2.5, and bring everything in within the Passivhaus metric. And this is alongside the projects we're doing with Edinburgh and Stuart, on track to be amongst the first of the Passivhaus schools being delivered in Scotland. And again, as you can see, no compromise to the architectural quality and educational spaces within. This is Maybury, one of the schools, which also includes a full health centre as well as a primary school that we're delivering with Stuart for the City of Edinburgh, and Curry Community High School, the first secondary school to Passivhaus being delivered in Scotland. And again, no sort of compromise to the quality of the architectural spaces and pedagogy that's expected of schools in Scotland. But what is good is we're going to be delivering it within cost metric and the SFT energy metric, to which capital funding is tied. You have to achieve the energy metric over 25 years to get the full capital funding on the project. So it's become a really essential thing to do in Scotland. And there's all the sort of underlying data that goes into that. So on this one, we managed to get the form factor down below 2, which means you've got a very, very simple, sort of elegant form, which is just going to be cheaper to build than if you developed a more complicated form, more complicated detail. So just to sum up, in the past, buildings used to be simple, but very energy consuming and comfortable and sustainable. In the present time, we've got fixated on complex solutions, carbon offsetting, and buildings which often have performance gaps that are uncomfortable, they overheat, and they use too much energy. What Passivhaus offers is a much simpler approach to form, to detailing, that's energy saving, and through monitoring over the last 10 years of schools in the UK, we can confidently say deliver comfort and the energy savings that would be expected. And as I've said, through this process, we've managed consistently to deliver buildings within overall cost metrics by offsetting and balancing additional costs that you do get with cost savings of good design. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. If you just leave your camera on, we're going to do some questions that have come in from the attendees today. I might just ask Stuart to come on as well. We're running slightly over time, so we'll combine the questions for Jonathan with the sort of panel. Let me just turn my video on as well. There we go. Excellent. Okay, so Jonathan, first of all, thank you so much for that presentation. It is a wonderfully practical guide to Passivhaus design that you give, and you do come away thinking, why on earth would you design anything else? And I hope that's the takeaway our attendees have today as well. So on to the questions. A question's come in here to say, which specific responsibilities are assigned to the Passivhaus designer? And as a result, are some deliverables typically required by the architect? Are those reassigned to the Passivhaus designer, or is this additional work that the architect would normally do?
Yeah, I mean, Passivhaus designer is a very distinct discipline. The designer is responsible for undertaking the PHP analysis, which is quite a complex bit of modelling, and then taking the analysis through the more detailed aspects of thermal bridge analysis and collation and collection of primary energy data with the client. So it's really not something that takes away any responsibility from the architect nor the M&E consultant. So it's an additional consultancy that's required to deliver Passivhaus. It is often undertaken by the architectural team. We do that in-house at Archetype, and I know Sarah does too. So it's undertaken by architects with additional training, but in terms of discipline requirements and fee, it is an additional requirement, an additional cost to undertake that analysis that on a normal building you don't have to do.
Great, thank you. Another question's coming, which was one that was posed to Stuart, but somebody has asked that it's reposed to you as well, which is the question around program. So that was, where would you say the major time considerations are in terms of project program in comparison to a non-passive house project?
Yeah, I would say the main implications are upfront. You need to spend more time at the earlier REAP stages. It's often been the case that early stages are rushed and then issues are sorted out later down the line. With passive house, that's too late. So I think you need to allow some more time, some extra weeks or even months in REAP stages 1 to 3. But I think in terms of construction phase, it doesn't have a major effect because all the quality checks that a contractor on a major project will be doing, they can incorporate the passive house requirements into that. If anything, I think we probably should allow some extra weeks at the end for proper commissioning, which often gets rushed and you can't rush in passive house. So if anything, just at later stages, things like the air tests just programmed in as part of a normal process. They don't need to, if you leave an air test to the end and then fail, then you have a major project program implications. But if you test steadily as you go along, then you eliminate that risk.
Thank you. I think that's a very good practical summary of the kind of the programmatic implications for passive house projects. This question is probably more aligned to Stuart. How do you account for on-site supervision required to ensure quality construction in early stage cost planning?
Yeah, I think going back to my principle about getting into the detail early doors, the easy way to do it would be to add a percentage on top of what we would normally allow for a contractor's preliminaries percentage. So you know, might add a percentage point, a couple of percentage points, depending on the size of the project. I think it's not that difficult to break it down into roles. And Jonathan mentioned there additional air tightness testing. So we're allowing on our projects for an air tightness supervisor, you know, and an engineer for the duration of the project, and that's quite a lot. We're allowing some additional time for commissioning time, because I think Jonathan's got a great point there. We always cut corners with commissioning at the end of a project, but you're not able to do that. So we're going to have people there. The contractor's going to have to price that. So what we've been doing is we've been building up each of the roles, we've been clarifying them with other projects, and we've been putting costs against those individuals. We've also been making some allowances for air tightness tests. So rather than the normal tests that we would do at the end of the project, just for running tests as we go through, and that's going to be more than a contractor would normally deliver.
Okay, that's a good summary again. How would you say, you know, you set out what those roles are, how would you say that you can embed those within the kind of contract or ethos of the project? How do you ensure that those roles are included?
Yeah, it's a difficult one to do because normally, like I say, organisations cut corners, and we've asked for years, the industry's asked for years to have, for example, an M&E supervisor on site for the duration of the project. And we've all encountered scenarios where the individual will turn up for an hour each day and they say, we didn't say you had to be on site all day, every day for the duration of the project. And that's not acceptable. And I think part of the process is the early contractor engagement. So it's bringing them on the journey. It's getting the contractor to understand that this isn't a nice to have, that we can fail in delivering a passive house accreditation, and that's going to be a failure on their part. So, and the other thing that we can do is we can monitor it and manage it as we go through, and we can ask them for regular inputs and feedback as to what they're doing, the actions that they're taking, the quality installations that's going on. The third aspect is we're seeing more and more of this. Is there's a drive, certainly in Scotland, there's a drive towards quality in the construction industry, and there's a recognition that quality has dropped off in the construction industry. And Jonathan is a great protagonist for Passive House will deliver quality as a byproduct. We're engaging teams now to be retained on the client side, if there is a design and build aspect, to manage that quality and to monitor it and make sure that there's somebody representing the client team from a technical perspective all the way through. Maybe in time, Sarah, it'll just become part of the trust and the contractor will know what they need to do. Right now, we need to make its belt and braces and make sure that we're telling them what they have to do, and then that we're making sure that they're delivering on that.
Thank you. I mean, you alluded there to the kind of procurement side of things as well. Maybe it's a question that both you and Jonathan could just comment on. But in terms of what types of procurement are most appropriate to Passivhaus projects, you mentioned early contractor engagement.
I did, yeah. Well, you go first. On you go, Jonathan.
I was say we did over the years Passivhaus using the type of contracts. I don't think there's any one size fits all. You have to be Passivhaus this way. I think the important thing, which I think is what Stuart will say in a minute, is it needs to be a collaborative process within the design team and needs to be collaborative with the contractor. And the earlier you can bring the contractor on to bring their expertise to the table, the better, as long as they're prepared to go on their journey and not just the ways they've always done stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's it. And it's interesting, Jonathan used it in his presentation. The word that I didn't use and I should have done is collaborative. And I think that's part of the process for me, is getting the contractor to engage with the team, getting the team to engage with the contractor, and making sure that everybody understands the project. That's the critical bit. After that, Sarah, it could be a traditional procurement, it could be a design and build procurement, it could be any form of contract, as long as everybody approaches it with the right outset and the right mindset.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's certainly the early engagement we've always found on Passivhaus projects is you always reap the benefits. There's never been a negative experience from early engagement. So that's definitely a takeaway that the participants should have from today. This is another question which has just come in. So is there any capital funding mechanism which can benefit other parts of the UK to target Passivhaus in the same way as is being done in Scotland? And will the UK government adopt this? I know that Archetype have experience in all of the parts of the UK, so you might want to comment on this, Jonathan.
Yes, I wish that was the case. I think what's happened in Scotland is very powerful in that the Scottish Futures Trust has effectively set an energy metric which you have to achieve in order to receive capital funding into the project over 25 years. And there's no way around that. The higher energy, the less money you get, full stop. So it really drives everybody to achieve the best. And Passivhaus isn't the only way, but it's the guaranteed way to achieve that energy metric. In other parts of the UK, there have been targets set, but they're not enforced in the same way. So every project we've done in England has been local authority led, not government led. In Wales, the new MIM programme is actually encouraging energy efficiency and sort of POE in use, which is good. But we've got a number of examples in England at the moment where projects are being stopped or not proceeding because they don't meet particular sort of capital budget limits set, and despite energy targets, that's the cost is overriding it and they're not happening. So I would encourage all the UK devolved administrations and the central government to follow the example of Scottish government in setting a very, very clear and unambiguous system to enforce energy targets.
Yeah, and I guess with the Scottish system being performance-based, it's really it's really pushing forward Passivhaus as a very robust method to achieve the standard with minimum risk. We've been talking about risk in terms of the contractor's risk, but there's this client risk as well to do with the funding if you're going to lose funding from the buildings not performing.
Yeah, and if the client knows that they have to achieve that in 25 years, otherwise they'll lose income, they sit up and take notice. At the moment, you know, in England, just setting a target but not enforcing it means nothing, and it doesn't happen.
Yeah, yeah. Stuart, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I just going to. I always say is it's such a simple change, you know, and it's the funding in the Learning Estates programme. It's got the energy performance is one aspect. It's also life cycle cost, and it's maintenance of the facility and operation as well. So it's not just it's not all about capital. And when you say that out loud, it makes absolute sense. You know, we're building the estate. We know that the estate can perform, and then we know that it's going to be managed to keep it at its, you know, category A or B at its optimum state. That's just common sense, and it's a really simple change that's driving quite a big shift in mindset across the sector in Scotland. Yeah,
absolutely. It's definitely seen a very positive change as that standards being understood more across the educational sector. One sort of thing which you both kind of touched on was this staying involved in the project, during that commissioning period, and this sort of attitude maybe towards adopting soft landings. Is that something that maybe, Jonathan, you could comment on from a kind of architecture side, and Stuart, you could maybe comment on in terms of costings and how that's accommodated for in projects?
Yeah, I mean, we, as a practice, we've had some clients who've specifically put money into proper soft landings and even set aside a budget to pay for stuff that needs to be sorted during the soft landings process. Other clients who just expect the building to work from day one and aren't interested in soft landings. But as a practice, we've always felt it's an important thing to get, to stay in touch and check the building's working, and to try and solve issues if there are teething problems in the building. And also, as a practice, we've learned from that in order to make future buildings better. So I would say it's not consistent across the industry, but I would always encourage a client to commit to doing proper soft landings and to commit to it with some budget attached to it, because not all consultants are interested, not all contractors are interested. But if they know there's a collaborative input from the client to support that process, then they're more likely to engage with it, and that's to the benefit ultimately of the building and the user clients.
Thank you, Jonathan. Stuart, do you have anything to add on how we can budget for this, or how clients should budget for it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a time thing, and there's much that happens post completion that's to do with defects, and a contractor needs to rectify that. But there's much of the soft landing process, whether that be from the consultant team or whether that's from the contractors team. We're actually asking for time post completion, and I think what we need to be very clear is what is being expected of those organisations. We need to give them an opportunity to include for that in their costs, because if there's no provision for them to put a cost in for that, whether it's a fee or whether it's in the contract sum, then again they're going to cut corners, they're going to try to not deliver it, and it becomes an anticlimax as a process, or it's avoided altogether. So I think as an industry we need to have a clear definition of what everybody means by soft landings, and then when we do that, as we start a project, we need to give them the teams the opportunity to price for it. Again, when you go back to setting the budget, you need to make an allowance for that at that point. You can't just assume it all stops at handover.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Stuart. I'm going to probably just wrap up the Q&A there, just because we're now at 4:10, and we were going to finish at 4, but we can go over it by 15 minutes. But I'll take the last 5 minutes just to do the sort of summing up. So I'll just share my screen again now. So hopefully everyone can see my screen again. So just firstly, a huge thank you to the speakers and to all of the participants today. That was a very lively Q&A session. I really enjoyed that. I hope you did as well. And don't forget to sign up for the next sessions that I mentioned at the head of the session today. If you would like more information, there's lots of good resources. So the Trust have an excellent sort of resource available through their campaign page. There's a link on the screen here, and this link will take you to recordings of the phase 1 sessions that we talked about, which were from last autumn. It'll also take you to case studies and guidance documents and useful links for further information. The Trust also have an additional Passive House campaigns for social housing, net zero, and also retrofit projects. And with this recent spell of warm weather, I just wanted to take the opportunity to highlight the Keeping Cool online course, which is all about avoiding overheating risk. And again, this is open for booking now. And finally, yes, please do sign up for the regular newsletter to stay up to date with all of the great work and research being developed by the Trust. And a date for your diaries. So the Passive House Award ceremony will be on the 30th of June. It's free to attend, and it will be an excellent opportunity to see some really cutting edge and industry leading projects being delivered around the UK. And finally, a final thank you again to our speakers and to all of you as the participants. And, you know, it was great. We had a really busy session today. I hope you all got as much out of the speakers' presentations as I did. I've heard them speak before, but I never fail to learn more, especially through the Q&A session. So thank you again. And thank you to our sponsors, Robertson, Hub East Central, and Archetype. And I will close the session now. And as mentioned at the start, the webinar is being recorded, and you will be sent a link to that at the end. So thank you very much for your time today. Thursday, and I hope you have a nice afternoon remaining in the sunshine.